Okay, good morning guys. So today we're moving on to our next poem. So this poem is called Nettles and it's by a man named Vernon Scannell. So from this poem, basically I want you to understand and look back over the use of personification. Okay, so we've talked about this a few times before. Personification is when you're treating an object as if it's a person. We're going to look at the use of extended metaphor again. So we looked at that yesterday in the poem The Sea by James Reeves. So we're going to look at extended metaphor again here. And then we're going to look at the themes of family and parenthood very, very briefly. But this is a very useful poem if you're asked about either of those themes. Alright, so we'll start off with the poem itself. So the poem is Nettles. My son, aged 3, fell in a nettle bed. Bed seemed a curious name for those green spears, that regiment of spite behind the shed. There was no place for rest. With sobs and tears the boy came seeking comfort, and I saw white blisters beaded on his tender skin. We soothed him till his pain was not so raw. At last he offered us a watery grin, and then I took my billhook, honed the blade, and went outside and slashed in fury with it, till not a nettle in that fierce parade stood upright anymore. And then I lit a funeral pyre to burn the fallen dead. But in 2 weeks the busy sun and rain had called up tall recruits behind the shed. My son would often feel sharp wounds again. Alright, so the poem, main things we need to get from it is, what is the plot of the poem? What type of language does the poet use when speaking about the nettles? And what message is the poet giving us in this poem? So that's really what we're going to look at over the course of this video. Now I'm going to suggest that you pause the video here for a second, okay, and go back to that poem. So I'll just flip back to it. Okay, so I suggest you pause it, read through it again yourself once or twice, and just make sure you're totally clear about the poem and you've got all the ideas you can about the poem before we start working on it. Okay, so just pause it now. Okay, so moving on. We'll look at the first 8 lines of the poem first. Okay, so my son, aged 3, fell in a nettle bed. Bed seemed a curious name for those green spears, that regiment of spite behind the shed. There was no place for rest. With sobs and tears the boy came seeking comfort, and I saw white blisters beaded on his tender skin. We soothed him till his pain was not so raw. At last he offered us a watery grin. Okay, so I've stopped it after those lines because after these lines it's when the father goes out. So this is the first section of the poem. I would say it's about the son falling into the nettles, being hurt by the nettles, and coming into his parents for comfort as you'd expect a 3-year-old child to do. So 3 things to think about. So why does the poet think the word bed is a strange name for a group of nettles? So he says bed seemed a curious name for those green spears. Why is it curious? What's strange about that? What type of language does he use to describe the nettles? So we're really looking here at lines 2 and 3. So bed seemed a curious name for those green spears, that regiment of spite behind the shed. What's the language? Think about the language, think about the way it sounds when you read it. And then finally at the end, what technique does the poet use in line 6? So white blisters beaded on his tender skin. And what is the technique he's using there? And why is he using that technique? Okay, so again, just have a bit of a think about that for a few seconds. Maybe pause and think about it for a minute, see if we can come up with an answer to those questions before we move on. So when we look at the word bed, he thinks it's strange. Okay, most of you should have got this. He thinks the word is strange because bed is usually somewhere that's comfortable. It's usually somewhere safe, especially for kids. Okay, they go to bed to feel comfortable. It's placing the blanket to make them feel safe. But here, the bed, the nettle bed, is only causing pain. So it's not really what we expect to hear from a bed. Right, the language he's using, so the main words I'm going to pick out here is spears and regiment or spite. Okay, so spears obviously is a weapon. Okay, regiment is a military language. Okay, it's a language from the army. Right, we talk about a regiment, a group of soldiers, and spite. Okay, spite is hatred. Okay, spite, really, really disdainful, really hating someone. Right, so when we use those language, okay, what he's doing is he's personifying the nettles, using military language, and he's treating the nettles as if they're soldiers, as if they're out purposely trying to attack his son rather than just being nettles that he fell into. Okay, he sees the nettles as something that are attacking his son. And then technique in line 6 is blisters beaded. right? And we're using alliteration there, okay? And the alliteration is repetition of that B sound, right? And it sounds very, very harsh. So what he's trying to make us do is realise the shock and the pain and the harshness of the son's experience of what he's going through. Alright, so I'm going to move on then to lines 9 to 16, the second half of the poem. So this is where the poem changes. So the first half is what happened to the son, and this half is what the father does afterwards. And then I took my billhook, honed the blade, and went outside and slashed in fury with it, till not a nettle in that fierce parade stood upright any more. And then I lit a funeral pyre to burn the fallen dead. But in 2 weeks the busy sun and rain had called up tall recruits behind the shed. My son would often feel sharp wounds again. Just so we're all clear, a billhook is just this instrument that's on the display there on the board at the moment. It's just like a machete or something, and a big knife for cutting down nettles or grass. Just so we're clear on that. So, a few questions here. So what does the poet do at this point? Okay, so what is this section of the poem about? How does he speak about the nettles? Again, we're looking at the type of language he's using. And what does the poet admit at the end of the poem? Again, this is the big message behind the poem, this big revelation, a big message coming at the end of the poem that you need to be aware of. Okay, so first thing, in the second half of the poem goes out into the garden and he's cutting down the nettles. Okay, so he's trying to protect the son from being hurt again. He's getting rid of the nettles, getting rid of the danger. Right, so the plot of the poem, and we're going to come back to that at the end, is quite simple. Right, this is the second half that he's going out and he's cutting down the nettles. When he speaks about the nettles, he uses personification again. So he calls them fallen dead. Right? So he's talking about as if they're soldiers who've been killed in a war, the fallen dead. Right? He wants us to see this as if it's a fight. Right? His fight against the nettles is a war. It's active two sides against each other. Right? So he's a soldier, he's fighting to protect his son against this enemy army, and he's trying to protect his son from any pain. And then at the end of the poem, he says, but in 2 weeks, the busy sun and rain called up tall recruits behind the shed. So in 2 weeks, new recruits on new nettles. So again, this personification is back to that extended metaphor. So anytime he talks about soldiers or recruits or regiment, right, it's military language, it's a metaphor for the nettles, okay, which are then also a metaphor for pain, which we'll talk about in a second. So at the end of the poem, the nettles have come back. And even though he destroyed them, even though he went down and he did everything he could to get rid of them, he can't stop them from coming back. He can't stop these things that cause pain to his son from coming back again and again. And so he admits to himself is that no matter what I do, I'm never going to be always able to protect him from pain. My son is going to have to experience pain. And that's the final line, okay? So my son would often feel sharp wounds again. We'll come back to that in a second as well. So make sure you have your notes on those. So those are some key techniques there. We have the military language, personification, all going on here again. Now you might see some other things in there. Slashed and fury, very aggressive sounding as well. We could use talk about that. Alright, so important techniques. The most important ones which we said at the start as well are personification and extended metaphor. So personification, the poet speaks about the nettles as if they're soldiers. He's talking about them as if they're people, as they're actively doing something, not like they're just plants. Okay, so this tells us maybe that he's afraid of them, okay, and that they are very, very dangerous. There's someone who's actively trying to hurt his son. Right? We also have the extended metaphor. So the nettles are personified throughout the whole poem. So for this reason we can call them metaphor. The nettles and the soldiers, it's all standing for different things. Okay, so the military language, this is the language we're given, is describing soldiers. But really what he's talking about is nettles. So that's the personification. And then the nettles are also a metaphor. So it's not just nettles. Yes, the story is about his son falling in nettles, but it means more than that. It means any time his son goes through pain or suffering. That's what he's talking about here. He's talking about any time his son is going to go through pain and the effect of that on him, and that he never wants his son to have to go through that pain, but at the end he has to admit that he can't stop it. Okay. So back to those questions we started on. What is the plot of the poem? So the story of the poem is simple. A child is stung by nettles. He runs to his parents in pain. Right? The parents soothe him to try and make him feel better. The father then goes out and destroys the nettles. And after 2 weeks, the nettles have grown back again. And that's the story of the poem. That's the plot. That's what's going on. Okay? The type of language, the most important things you need to know about is the personification. Okay, so you have to be able to talk about personification in this poem. So the Nettles are being talked about as if they were humans. Right? And the military language. Okay, so he's describing them as if they're soldiers, not just any humans, they're soldiers, they're an army attacking his son. And the message of this poem. So the message, the poet tells us that as a parent he always wants to protect his child from any pain. And that's a fairly simple message. As a parent, he wants to protect his child. So this is really important when we talk about the theme of family. If you're asked about family, you can talk about this idea that parents want to protect their children, so in this case a son, but parents want to protect their children, but maybe they can't, and they have to accept that in order to allow their child to grow up, they have to accept that they can't always protect him. Right? So he also, however, wants to understand, so he wants to understand no matter what he does, he can't always protect his son. Pain is part of life, we're all going to go through it, everyone has different experiences of pain, right? And we have to accept that, and that's important for him to allow his son to go through pain, because his son needs to be able to mature and grow up and become independent, and pain is just part of that process, even if we don't like it. Okay, so your question for today, or your task for today, so this question is going to work for both higher level and ordinary level. Okay, so everyone's going to be doing the same question, but those of you doing higher, you're going to give me a bit more detail. So I'll have 5 or 6 sentences per paragraph. Okay, so we're talking about a point, our quotation, our explanation, our thinking about a technique or a key word, our talking about how that affects the reader. Okay, lots and lots of detail going on in those paragraphs. Ordinary level, you should be going at least 4 sentences per paragraph, and 2 or 3 paragraphs altogether. So the question is, what does the poet tell us about families in this poem? And I want you to act as if it's a 20-mark question in your exam. So spend about 25 minutes maybe writing the answer, 2 to 3 paragraphs, and make sure you're using that PQE or analytical paragraph style. Okay guys, so that's the end of this poem. Okay, if any questions, send them to me through Teams and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.